Wirt Myers is a KU graduate. She has written a book previously about hospitals in Newton, Kansas. I met her on email, and she made me aware of Maybe Williams Ward, a Kansas poet. And she is the grandmother of twins and a basset hound named Lana. And has many other fine qualities, but I will present Lana Wirt.
Unlike these other authors who are school teachers and don't need notes, I need notes. And I see some dear friends who have arrived. My book, Prairie Rhythms, tells the story of a nationally acclaimed poet who left behind a legacy of over 2,000 poems and 7 published books. Her literary career lasted 50 years, yet few people remember her today. I am hoping to remedy that situation. I believe that once you read about Maybe Williams Ward and her poetry, you'll not forget her. And I predict that you too will be fascinated by the woman William Allen White called the champion poet of Kansas. He wrote in his Emporia Gazette in 1930, "She excels because she is of the prairie." And her muses were the trees, the winds, and the wheat fields of the plains. She always viewed her home on the prairie as a vast source of realistic subject matter. And in her words, a wide, tall sky, the more impressive for the flatness of the plain. Great free winds, sometimes rising to tornado crescendo. A subtle color scheme of green and tawny gold with sage gray. And a people, salty, racy, and individual. The Kansas prairie provides these varied stimuli for her poets. Then if any Kansan writes verse that is limited in outlook, it's not the fault of our sky. If pettiness shows, it's not the fault of our winds. Blatant color could not truly reflect the aspect of the plain, nor conventional characterization indicate the flavor of her people. Ward also felt the rhythm of her poems, and she found when she would be composing one, her pencil would be making random lines on the page, expressing the mood and the meaning of her verses. So she transferred these line rhythms to blocks of linoleum and wood, hand carving them, creating these block prints that were visual representations of the rhythms of the poems. And on the cover is an example of one of these. I first encountered Maybe Williams Ward when I was a graduate student at Wichita State University in 1978. I was working at the University Library in the Department of Special Collections, and it was my assigned task to organize Ward's manuscript collection. And as soon as I began reading her diaries and correspondence, I was captivated by her personality. Her down-to-earth approach to life, and also her accomplishments that surpassed those of most women who were born on the Midwestern Plains in 1882. Ward's life touched people and events the rest of us only read about in history books. She grew up in Osawatomie, a small eastern Kansas town not far from here, where radical abolitionist John Brown was considered a hero. And she attended the University of Kansas at the turn of the 20th century, alongside people who now have buildings named for them. Names like Strong and Snow and Carew. Entries in her diaries include into conversation with temperance crusader Carrie Nation. News of sinking of the Titanic. Shaking hands with William Jennings Bryan and Teddy Roosevelt. And residing in a woodlands retreat in the company of Pulitzer Prize-winning authors. I tried to let Ward tell her own story much of the time, including an abundance of quotes from her diary and correspondence, because I think that her colorful descriptions are fascinating windows into history. And I would like to read one to you. It's her description of Carrie Nation, when Nation came to address a group of students at KU in 1901, who had gathered at a fraternity house. She was a large, tall woman, but had a rather motherly look when not engaged in one of her tirades. She had her hatchet in one hand and a Bible in the other, part of the time, but laid them both down on a table to walk up determinedly to two boys who were coming in the door, just starting to douse their cigarettes. She snatched them from the boys' mouths and held them up and out as if vermin, while she talked about their harmfulness and sinfulness. She told the girls that it would injure our children to be if we should dare to smoke, and we should even not marry a man who smoked for heredity's sake. At one point, looking tired, she sat down momentarily and asked for a drink of water. Nothing stronger, mind you, she said, almost with a twinkle. Ward was 39 when her literary career began. In 1921, when Life magazine accepted the very first poem she ever submitted for publication. It consisted of just 4 lines, and it was entitled, Youth Wants Summer. Youth wants summer and a sweetheart in the moon, and flowers in a fine new gown, forsooth, and music and excitement, and to win tomorrow's game, age wants youth. Within just 4 years of this first publication, her talent was recognized nationally. But instead of moving east, where established literary circles might have provided her with greater career opportunities, she chose to remain in the Midwest with her husband Merle, going wherever his grain elevator business took them. And in 1921, when she received that letter of acceptance from Life magazine, they were living in little Montezuma, Kansas, and the only house they could find to rent in that tiny prairie town had absolutely no modern conveniences. As she recalled, not since childhood had I been roughing it in this fashion, but we were young and happy in making a start for ourselves. Business was good. We did not mind this pioneering. And in the backyard John, I opened a letter that gave me a big thrill. Each morning I would walk downtown with my husband and get the mail. This time I had to hurry back. The check for $5 from Life magazine looked mighty big to me that fall day on a 3-holer in Montezuma, Kansas. May had met Merle when both of them were students at KU in 1902. She had first come to Lawrence in 1899 when she enrolled in the university. And she lived in the house of a family friend, Mrs. Thomas Stone Roberts. And she described the Roberts home as full of books and magazines and smart children. One of those smart children was Roy A. Roberts, who later became editor of the Kansas City Star. She described her years at KU as a golden time, when she began to know that she was a poet, and that she belonged to that general classification of people who are artistic. But interestingly, she earned her degree in mathematics. She considered art and literature to be luxury courses, and she felt that mathematics required more discipline and direction in order for her to understand it. She also could see a correlation between the two. comparing the writing of a sonnet to the steps involved in the proof of a mathematical theorem. In the spring of 1904, May and Merle became engaged, secretly engaged, at the old windmill here in Lawrence, which I understand was a favorite retreat for young lovers and was located somewhere in the vicinity of 9th and Emory Road. When she went home that summer to Osawatomie, she wrote Merle a letter and said, "Mama is very much shocked at my accepting a picture of a windmill from you with the date on the back. She knows the reputation of that old mischief maker." The two were married in 1909 in Osawatomie's old stone church, which had been built by John Brown's brother-in-law and nephew. And John Brown's grandniece played the organ at their wedding ceremony. Fortunately, she never had to make a choice between her marriage and career. And when someone asked her once if Merle resented her busy writing and traveling schedule, she replied, "No, he doesn't mind my going. If he feels it'll make me happy, then I'll come back." In 1925, she was gone from him for an entire month when she received a coveted invitation to the famous McDowell Colony of the Arts in Peterborough, New Hampshire. She was there during the month of June, along with Edwin Arlington Robinson, who by this time had already won the Pulitzer Prize for his writing twice, poets Sarah Teasdale and Stephen Vincent Benet, and also DuBose and Dorothy Hayward, who were collaborating on the script for the play Porgy and Bess during their stay at the colony. May wrote home to her family, "Notables are as thick as blackberries." But a poem she wrote while at the colony shows that her heart was back in Kansas, and it's my personal favorite. It's entitled Sky Mountain. Prairie land is golden, airy, blind. The sky our only mountain, we inside. Who would choose a small land where hills, steadily asserting granite wills, narrow all horizons, stand apart? Ah, my golden prairie, and the sky mountain's heart. In 1926, she became editor of The Harp, a national poetry magazine, which, believe it or not, was published in Larned. She also helped to organize the Poetry Society of Kansas about this time, serving as its president, and also served as president of the Kansas Authors Club. And the Poetry Society of America awarded her poems first place twice. The first time in 1937 for a series of poems entitled Dust Bowl, which were published in the New York Times. And again in 1946 for her poem In That Day. Merle's grain elevator business took them as far west as Lamar, Colorado, and then back to Kansas, to Montezuma, and then Spearville and Belgrade, before the Great Depression and the Dust Bowl ended his grain business. Then they moved to his hometown of Wellington and took over ownership and management of his family's hotel, and they remained in Wellington for the rest of their lives. Economic times grew increasingly more difficult for the Lords, but May continued to write, and her last book was published in 1969. It was when she was 87 years old, and it was published by the University Press of Kansas.